Isaiah had been cleaning pools in Malibu for 3 years, but he'd never seen anything that made him forget how to breathe until Sophia stepped onto her back patio in that white sundress. The fabric moved like water against her skin, catching the late afternoon light in a way that made the pool skimmer slip from his hands and clatter against the concrete. He cursed under his breath, crouching to retrieve the net while trying not to look like he'd been staring. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, mixing with the jasmine that climbed her back fence, but all Isaiah could focus on was the soft sound of her bare feet against the stone and the way the dress hugged her curves before flowing loose around her thighs. "Sorry," she called out, her voice carrying that slight rasp he'd noticed during their brief exchanges over the past month. "I didn't mean to startle you." Isaiah straightened, pool skimmer in hand, and forced himself to meet her eyes, dark brown, with flecks of gold that caught the sun. She was beautiful in a way that belonged in magazines, not standing 10 feet away from a man who smelled like pool chemicals and sweat. "No problem, Mrs. Chen," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. "Sophia," she corrected, "the same way she had the last 3 times. Mrs. Chen makes me sound like my mother-in-law." She moved closer to the pool's edge, close enough that he caught a hint of her perfume, something light and expensive that made him think of summer nights and secrets. The dress shifted with each step, the thin straps barely holding it in place, and Isaiah had to concentrate on not letting his gaze wander. "The water looks perfect," she said, kneeling beside the pool to trail her fingers through the surface. The movement caused the neckline of her dress to dip, revealing a glimpse of smooth skin that made Isaiah's chest tighten. He cleared his throat and focused on adjusting the skimmer pole. "Should be good for swimming. pH levels are balanced." When she looked up at him, something passed between them, a moment of recognition that had nothing to do with employer and employee. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something, but instead she stood and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Same time next week?" Isaiah nodded, not trusting his voice. As he gathered his equipment, he could feel her watching him, the weight of her gaze like a physical touch. When he finally looked back, she was still. There, silhouetted against the sliding glass door, the white dress making her look like something from a dream he shouldn't be having. The following Tuesday, Isaiah arrived 15 minutes early and parked 2 houses down. He sat in his truck, engine off, telling himself he was just being thorough about his schedule. The truth was, he'd been thinking about white sundresses and golden eyes for 7 straight days, and he needed a moment to get his head right before walking through that gate. When he finally approached the backyard, Sophia was nowhere to be seen. The sliding glass door remained closed, curtains drawn, and Isaiah felt both relieved and disappointed. He could do his job without distraction today. Keep things professional. He set up his equipment with deliberate focus, testing the water chemistry. First, then skimming leaves that had accumulated since his last visit. The routine was familiar, calming. This was what he knew: chlorine levels and filter maintenance, not complicated women in expensive houses. "Good morning," her voice came from behind him, formal and distant. Isaiah turned to find Sophia standing near the patio furniture, fully dressed in dark jeans and a loose-fitting blouse that revealed nothing. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Morning, Mrs. Chen." He emphasized her last name deliberately, establishing the boundary she seemed to want. She flinched slightly but nodded. "The pool seems to be running well, no issues this week." "That's good." Isaiah returned to his skimming, hyper-aware of her presence 20 feet away. She wasn't leaving, just standing there like she was supervising his work. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Do you service other homes in the neighborhood?" "A few." He didn't elaborate, didn't mention that hers was the only appointment he looked forward to. The Williamses mentioned they might need someone reliable. Isaiah paused, recognizing the subtext. She was trying to professionalize their interaction, reduce him to a service provider she could recommend to friends. It stung more than it should have. "I can leave my card," he said evenly. "That would be perfect." The conversation died there, leaving only the sound of the pool filter and distant traffic. Isaiah finished his work in silence, while Sophia retreated to a lounge chair with a book she didn't seem to be reading. When he packed up his equipment, she approached with an envelope containing his payment. Exact change, no tip, no personal touch. "Same time next week?" she asked, back to the script they'd followed for months before last Tuesday. "Yes, ma'am." As Isaiah walked toward the gate, he caught her reflection in the sliding glass door. She was watching him leave, one hand pressed against her throat like she was holding something back. The heat was brutal the third week, the kind of Los Angeles summer that made the air shimmer and turned pool maintenance into an endurance test. Isaiah had been working for 40 minutes when sweat started dripping onto his equipment, making his grip slippery on the vacuum pole. He wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a streak of sunscreen and chlorine, when the sliding door opened behind him. "You look like you're melting out there." Isaiah turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway, holding a tall glass of ice water. She was dressed casually again, shorts and a tank top, but there was something different in her posture, less rigid than last week. "It's not too bad," he lied, though his shirt was soaked through. She stepped onto the patio, ice clinking in. The glass. "I made extra iced tea. You want some?" The offer hung between them, loaded with implications they both understood. Accepting meant crossing back over the line they'd drawn last week. Declining meant staying safely professional. Isaiah's throat was parched, and the condensation on her glass looked like salvation. "That'd be great, thank you." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and disappeared inside. Through the open door, he caught glimpses of her moving through a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White marble countertops, expensive appliances that probably cost more than his truck. When she returned with a second glass, she gestured toward the patio table. "Sit for a minute. You've been out here in this heat for almost an hour." Isaiah hesitated, glancing at his equipment scattered around the pool deck. "I should finish." "It'll wait." Her voice was gentle but insistent. "Please." He joined her at the table, acutely aware of how out of place he must look in her pristine outdoor space. The iced tea was perfect, not too sweet, with fresh mint that made his sinuses clear. "This is really good," he said. "My grandmother's recipe." She insisted mint had to be grown, not bought. Sophia tucked one leg under herself, suddenly looking younger. "Do you have family in L.A.? "Some cousins in Inglewood." "You?" She shook her head. "Ex-husband got most of our friends in the divorce. His friends, really. I was just along for the ride." The admission surprised him with its honesty. Isaiah studied her face, noting the way her jaw tightened when she mentioned her ex. "How long ago?" 8 months. She traced patterns in the condensation on her glass. "Still getting used to the quiet." "Quiet can be good," Isaiah said carefully. "Can be." She looked up at him. "Can be lonely too." The words settled between them like a confession, and Isaiah felt something shift in his chest. She wasn't just the beautiful woman in the big house anymore. The umbrella cast a circle of shade over the patio table where they'd started meeting each week, an unspoken arrangement that felt both natural and dangerous. Isaiah finished adjusting the pool's chemical balance while Sophia prepared their drinks inside, the ritual now as familiar as breathing. When she emerged with 2 glasses of iced tea, he was already seated in what had become his chair, the one facing away from the house so he could watch for neighbors, old habits from a childhood where being seen in the wrong place meant trouble. You always sit like you're planning an escape route, Sophia observed, settling across from him. Isaiah's hand stilled on his glass. Force of habit. Bad neighborhood growing up? He nodded slowly. Compton. You learned to read rooms fast, know where the exits were. He took a sip of tea, studying her face for judgment. Not exactly pool boy material, right? Why would you say that? Come on. Isaiah gestured at the manicured yard, the expensive patio furniture. Your neighbors probably expect someone who looks like their landscaper, not like me. Sophia was quiet for a moment, her finger tracing the rim of her glass. My ex-husband used to say I had terrible taste in people. Too trusting, too naive. She looked up at Isaiah. He especially hated when I talked to service workers, said it was inappropriate. Maybe he was threatened. By what? By people who earned their living with their hands, instead of crushing others with contracts. The bitterness in his voice surprised them both. Sophia leaned forward slightly, and Isaiah caught a hint of her perfume mixing with the jasmine from the fence. What did you do before pools? Construction, good money, but the foreman had opinions about quotas and who belonged on which crews. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Turns out having a degree in engineering doesn't matter if you don't look the part. You're an engineer? Was. Now, I clean pools and sleep better at night. Sophia absorbed this, her expression shifting. I was an art teacher before I got married. Loved it, but David said it wasn't serious enough for a lawyer's wife. Too bohemian. You miss it. Every day. Her voice grew soft. There's something about watching someone discover they can create something beautiful. Like they're seeing themselves. Clearly for the first time. Isaiah found himself leaning forward, drawn by the passion in her voice. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with understanding and something deeper. Maybe you could go back, he said. Maybe. She met his eyes. What about you? Ever think about engineering again? Sometimes. Their knees almost touched under the small table. Depends on what I'm building toward. The storm came out of nowhere, the way summer storms do in Los Angeles. One moment clear skies, the next moment thunder rolling across the hills like a warning. Isaiah was skimming the last of the debris when the first fat raindrops hit a pool deck, each one the size of a quarter. Get inside, Sophia called from the doorway, her voice barely audible over the sudden downpour. Now! He grabbed his equipment and sprinted for the house as the sky opened up completely. By the time he reached the sliding door, water was streaming from his hair and his shirt clung to his chest like a second skin. Sophia stepped back to let him in, and Isaiah found himself standing in her living room for the first time, dripping chlorine-scented water onto polished hardwood floors. I'm soaking your house, he said, looking around at furniture that probably cost more than his annual rent. It's just water. She disappeared down a hallway and returned with a thick towel. Here. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. A contact so brief it might have been accidental, except for the way her breath caught. Isaiah dried his face and hair, hyper-aware of how small the space felt with both of them in it, how her perfume mixed with the rain-cooled air coming through the door. The house was beautiful, all clean lines and carefully chosen artwork, but it felt hollow, like a showroom waiting for someone to live in it. Nice place, he said, though the compliment felt inadequate. It's too big. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking lost in her own home. David picked it, said we needed something that made a statement. Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by thunder that rattled the windows. The rain hammered against the glass with increasing intensity. Looks like you're stuck for a while, she said, glancing toward the storm. Isaiah nodded, settling the towel around his shoulders. Being alone with her inside felt different than their conversations on the patio, more intimate, more dangerous. Every surface reflected their presence back at them. Windows, mirrors, the black screen of a television that dominated one wall. Sophia moved to the kitchen island, putting distance between them. But Isaiah could feel the charged air that had nothing to do with the storm outside. When she turned to face him, something in her expression had shifted. "I could make coffee," she offered, her voice softer than usual. "I'd like that." As thunder crashed overhead and rain lashed the windows, Isaiah realized they had crossed another line. The space between employer and employee had collapsed entirely, leaving only a man and a woman alone in a house that felt like it was holding its breath. Isaiah's phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with a text from his cousin Marcus. "Heard you got yourself. A rich lady. Man, you better be careful." He stared at the message from his cramped studio apartment, coffee growing cold in his hands. Word traveled fast in his neighborhood, even when you thought you were being careful. He'd mentioned Sophia once, just once, to his buddy Carlos, who apparently couldn't keep his mouth shut. By Tuesday, when Isaiah pulled up to Sophia's house, he noticed Mrs. Patterson from next door lingering by her mailbox longer than necessary. Her eyes tracked his movements as he unloaded his equipment, and when Sophia appeared on the patio in a sundress, the older woman's disapproval was visible even from 50 yards away. "She's been out there for 20 minutes, Sophia said quietly, settling into her usual chair with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Let her look." But Isaiah felt the weight of scrutiny differently now. Every gesture felt magnified, every shared laugh potentially misinterpreted. When Sophia leaned forward to hand him his drink, her fingers lingering against his for just a moment, he glanced toward the fence line automatically. "You're nervous," she observed. "Just being careful." Of what? Isaiah didn't answer immediately. How could he explain that men who looked like him had learned to be cautious around women who looked like her? That history was littered with misunderstandings that ended badly for people with his skin color and bank account. "People talk," he said finally. "Let them. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll blame if this goes sideways." Sophia's expression tightened. "What exactly do you think this is?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to name. Isaiah took a long sip of tea, buying time, when his phone buzzed with another text. This, one from his brother. "Mom saw you on some white lady's Instagram. WTF, man? Everything okay?" Sophia asked, noticing his frown. "Fine." He pocketed the phone, but the damage was done. The outside world had invaded their sanctuary, bringing judgment and assumptions and the weight of expectations that felt impossible to meet. Sophia must have sensed his withdrawal because she reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Isaiah," he looked up to find her eyes serious, determined. "I don't care what people say." "You should," he said gently, not pulling away but not returning the pressure either. "Because eventually they'll make you care." The words settled between them like a prediction neither wanted to acknowledge. In the distance, Mrs. Patterson finally retreated inside, but her disapproval lingered in the air like smoke. The equipment malfunction happened just after sunset. Isaiah was packing up when the pool pump started making a grinding noise that meant expensive repairs if left overnight. Sophia insisted he come inside to use her phone to call his supplier, leading him into the living room, where soft lamps cast golden shadows across cream-colored walls. "The number's disconnected," Isaiah said, hanging up her landline. "I'll have to try again in the morning." "Stay for dinner," Sophia said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, I was about to order takeout anyway. Chinese." The domestic intimacy of sharing a meal felt both natural and terrifying. They sat on her couch with containers of lo mein between them, the coffee table scattered with chopsticks and napkins. The evening news played quietly in the background, but neither was watching. "Thank you," Isaiah said, "for this, for not making it weird." "Why would I make it weird?" He gestured around the room, at the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, The life she'd built that was so different from his own. Because we don't make sense on paper. Good thing life isn't lived on paper. When he looked at her, really looked, he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Vulnerability mixed with determination, like she was working up the courage to say something that scared her. "Isaiah," she began, then stopped, her fingers playing with the hem of her shirt. "What?" "I keep thinking about that day in the rain. How it felt when you were here. The air between them seemed to thicken." Isaiah set down his container, suddenly unable to focus on anything but the way the lamplight caught the gold in her eyes. "Sophia, I know this is complicated," she continued, sliding closer on the couch. "I know people will talk and judge and make assumptions, but I can't stop thinking about you." He should have pulled back, should have reminded her about boundaries and consequences and all the reasons this was dangerous. Instead, he found himself leaning toward her, drawn by the honesty in her voice and the way she smelled like jasmine and possibility. Their faces were inches apart when her phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the moment like a blade. They jerked apart, the spell broken, both breathing hard. Sophia glanced at the caller ID and went pale. "It's my ex-husband." Isaiah stood immediately, the magic of the evening dissolving into something bitter and complicated. "I should go." "Isaiah, wait." But he was already moving toward the door, leaving her with the ringing phone and the weight of what almost happened hanging in the air between them. Isaiah didn't sleep that night. He lay on his narrow bed staring at the water stain on his ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening, the way Sophia had looked at him, the honesty in her voice, how close they'd come to crossing a line that would change everything. His phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Marcus and his brother, warning him about white women and consequences and things that never ended well for men like him. He turned it face down and tried to ignore the voices in his head that sounded exactly like theirs. By morning, he'd convinced himself it was better this way. The phone call had been a blessing, a reminder of the world that existed outside Sophia's perfect backyard, a world where pool cleaners didn't get happy endings with lawyers' ex-wives. He called his supervisor and requested a different route, claiming he needed to pick up more commercial accounts. When Jenkins asked why he was dropping his best residential client, Isaiah mumbled something about scheduling conflicts and hung up before he could change his mind. Sophia let David's call go to voicemail, then listened to his message 3 times before deleting it. He wanted to discuss their property settlement, he said, but his tone carried the familiar edge of control that made her stomach clench. She stood in her living room where takeout containers still sat on the coffee table, evidence of what had almost happened. The space felt different now, charged with possibility and regret in equal measure. She'd been so close to telling Isaiah how she felt, so close to taking the leap that terrified and thrilled her. Then David's call had shattered the moment, reminding her of all the reasons she'd sworn off complications. When Tuesday came and a different man showed up to service her pool, a young white guy who called her ma'am and kept his eyes down, Sophia felt something cold settle in her chest. "Where's Isaiah?" she asked. "Route change," the new technician said without looking up. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of your pool." She retreated inside, watching from the kitchen window as this stranger moved efficiently through Isaiah's routine. No lingering glances, no shared iced tea, no moments of connection that made her feel alive again. By evening, she'd drafted a dozen texts to Isaiah's number, each one deleted before sending. What could she say? That she missed him? That David's call meant nothing? That she was tired of being afraid? Instead, she sat on her patio alone, listening to the pool filter hum and wondering if she'd just let the best thing in her life slip away because she was too scared to fight for it. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but empty. Isaiah parked across the street from Sophia's house on Thursday evening, telling himself he just needed to see if she was okay. He'd driven by twice this week, unable to shake the feeling that walking away had been the wrong choice. The silver BMW in her driveway made his stomach drop. Through the front window, he could see two figures in the living room, Sophia and a tall man in an expensive suit who moved through her space like he still belonged there, David. Even from a distance, Isaiah could read the possessive way he stood, the commanding gestures that made Sophia's shoulders tense. Isaiah gripped his steering wheel, fighting the urge to march up to that front door. He had no right to interfere, no claim on her beyond shared conversations, and an almost kiss that had been interrupted by this same man's phone call. But when he saw David step closer to Sophia, backing her toward the wall with the casual intimidation of someone who'd done it before, Isaiah was out of his truck before rational thought could stop him. He rang the doorbell, his heart hammering as footsteps approached. When Sophia opened the door, her face was flushed, her eyes wide with something between relief and panic. "Isaiah," she breathed. "Sorry to bother you," he said loud enough for David to hear. "I left my water testing kit last week. Thought I'd grab it before the weekend." The lie came easily, but the truth was written all over his face when he met her eyes. He was here because he couldn't stand the thought of her being alone with a man who'd made her feel small. "Of course," Sophia said, stepping aside. "It's probably by the pool equipment." David appeared behind her, all sharp angles and expensive cologne. He was exactly what Isaiah had expected, tall, pale, perfectly groomed, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never being questioned. "And you are?" David asked, his tone carrying the subtle dismissal of someone used to servants. "Pool maintenance," Isaiah replied evenly, not offering his name. "I thought Sophia had switched services." "Temporary," Isaiah said, his eyes finding Sophia's. "Some things are worth coming back for." The double meaning wasn't lost on any of them. David's jaw tightened while Sophia's cheeks flushed pink. "I'll just grab that equipment," Isaiah continued, moving toward the backyard. As he pretended to search near the pool pump, he could hear their voices through the open door, David's rising with irritation, Sophia's firm and clear as she asked him to leave. "No, sis." When the BMW finally pulled away, Isaiah was still standing by the pool, no longer pretending to look for equipment that didn't exist. Sophia followed Isaiah to his apartment in Inglewood, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she navigated streets that felt worlds away from her manicured neighborhood. When she parked behind his truck outside a modest complex with peeling paint and barred windows, she understood why he'd been reluctant to bring her here. His studio was small, but immaculately clean. A bed tucked into one corner, a tiny kitchen, a desk covered with engineering textbooks that looked well worn. The contrast to her sprawling house was stark, but something about the space felt more honest than anywhere she'd lived in years. "It's not much," Isaiah said, suddenly self-conscious, as she took in his world. "It's you," Sophia replied, running her fingers along the spines of his books. "All those nights I wondered what your life looked like." Isaiah opened 2 beers and handed her one, their fingers brushing in the exchange that had become familiar. But here, in his space, everything felt different, more equal, more real. "Why did you come tonight?" he asked, settling on the edge of his bed since there was nowhere else to sit. Sophia took the desk chair, creating distance they both needed for this conversation. "Because when David showed up, all I could think about was how much I wanted you there instead." "That's dangerous territory, Sophia." "I know." She took a sip of beer, gathering courage. "He wants me back. Made it very clear that I'm making a mistake, that I don't belong with someone like you." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Someone like me?" His words, not mine. She leaned forward. "But they made me realize something. I've spent my whole adult life letting other people decide who I should be with, what I should want. My parents pushed me toward David because he was successful, stable, respectable. David controlled everything because I let him. And now Now I'm sitting in your apartment because this is where I want to be. Not because it makes sense, not because anyone approves, but because when I'm with you, I remember who I was before I started apologizing for taking up space. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light from his desk lamp. You need to understand something. If we do this, if we're together, people will assume you're rebelling or that I'm using you. They'll never see it as real. Do you see it as real? I see you, he said simply. The way you listen to my stories about Compton like they matter. How you make me want to use my engineering degree again. How you look at me like I'm worth something. Sophia set down her beer and moved to sit beside him on the bed. Then that's enough. That's more than I had in 8 years of marriage. When Isaiah reached for her hand, neither pulled away. The coffee shop on Melrose was busy enough to provide cover, but intimate enough for conversation. Isaiah arrived first, choosing a corner table where he could watch the door, old habits still guiding him, even in civilian clothes. When Sophia walked in, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, she looked more like herself than he'd ever seen her. She spotted him immediately and smiled. Not the careful, measured expression he'd grown used to, but something open and unguarded that made his chest tighten with possibility. "This feels different," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "What does?" "Being here together, in public, like we're not hiding anymore." Isaiah glanced around the cafe, noting the mix of artists and professionals, the kind of place where a black man and an Asian woman wouldn't draw stares. He'd chosen it carefully. "Are we not hiding?" he asked. Sophia reached across the table and laced her fingers through his, the gesture deliberate and visible to anyone watching. "I don't want to anymore. Do you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Going public meant facing judgment, dealing with family opinions, navigating a world that would have thoughts about their relationship, whether they wanted to hear them or not. "My mother's going to have questions," Isaiah said. "My parents will probably disown me. Again." Sophia's thumb traced across his knuckles. "David's already threatening to make things difficult with the divorce settlement. We could keep this quiet a little longer." "No." Her voice was firm. "I spent 8 years keeping parts of myself quiet to make other people comfortable. I won't do that with you." Isaiah studied her face, seeing the determination there, the way she held herself. "Differently now. You sure about this? About us? I'm sure I want to find out what us looks like when we're not sneaking around." She squeezed his hand. "I'm sure I want to wake up thinking about you without feeling guilty about it." The elderly woman at the next table smiled approvingly when she noticed their joined hands. A small thing, but it felt like permission. "Okay," Isaiah said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "Let's try this for real." Sophia's smile was radiant. "What's our first official public date? How about dinner? Somewhere nice, where I can take my time appreciating how beautiful you look without worrying about who's watching." "I'd like that." She pulled out her phone. "Should I post a picture? Really scandalize the neighbors?" Isaiah laughed, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "Let's start with dinner, work our way up to social media warfare." The backyard looked different 6 months later. Isaiah's tools sat openly on the patio table next to Sophia's art supplies, watercolors and brushes she'd bought after enrolling in evening classes at the community college. The rigid formality of the space had given way to something more lived in. His work boots by the door, her easel set up under the umbrella, 2 coffee cups that had become a permanent fixture on the small table where they still shared their mornings. The Pattersons finally waved back, Sophia said, settling into what had become their routine. Saturday mornings, coffee, and the easy silence of 2 people who no longer had to explain themselves to each other. Isaiah looked up from the engineering portfolio spread across his lap. night school applications he'd finally worked up the courage to complete. Progress. Slow progress. She curled her legs under herself, paint still under her fingernails from yesterday's class. Mrs. Rodriguez invited us to her daughter's graduation party. Us, or polite us. Definitely us. She asked if you'd look at her pool pump. Apparently word's gotten around that you actually know what you're doing. Isaiah smiled, thinking about the small contracting business he'd been planning, the way Sophia had insisted on helping him write the business plan, even though numbers made her head spin. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined this, sitting in her backyard on a Saturday morning, making plans that included both their futures. "Your mother called," Sophia said, handing him his coffee. "She wants to know if we're coming to Marcus's birthday barbecue." "What did you tell her?" "That we'd bring potato salad," Sophia grinned. "The good kind, not the store-bought stuff she complained about last time." It had taken 3 months for his family to warm up to Sophia, but once they realized she was there to stay, that she showed up to family dinners and remembered everyone's names and didn't flinch when his nephew climbed into her lap with sticky fingers, they'd accepted her with the grudging affection his family reserved for people who proved their worth over time. "David's lawyer called again," Sophia said, her tone carefully neutral, Isaiah's hand stilled on his application. "What now?" "Settlement papers. He's finally ready to sign." She leaned against his shoulder. "Guess he figured out I'm not coming." "Back? You sure about that?" Sophia turned to face him, her expression serious. "Isaiah, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." When she kissed him, slow and certain, the morning sun caught the diamond on her left hand, not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise ring he'd saved for 3 months to buy. Something that said they were building toward forever, one day at a time.